question of the week is, what's the best way to earn exposure for your small business? So that's what we tweeted out, and we wanted to know what you guys had to say. So there's a lot of very interesting ideas out there. I've seen a lot of the word awesome out there, which is, I totally dig it for sure. So what we want to get to one tweet in particular, because basically pointing the finger back to you guys. So Jonathan Brewer, House of Brewer, saying, oh, wow, well, Natalie, it's amazing at gaining exposure. You're the one that's the best at it, Natalie. So, let's point it back to you. So, guys, they seem to think that you guys are the experts. Chris, I'll hand it back over to you, and then we'll get to some of those tweets.
Oh, I thought we were going to Natalie. I was actually waiting to hear her answer. Let's do that. Natalie, how do you account for all that attention and beauty that you got to all those different magazines?
I think joint venture partnerships are actually a really great thing for small businesses. I think it's better when you're small to look at your competition as collaborators and try to create win-wins. And I actually think that's how I've built most of my exposure, and just giving a lot to other people as well. And it all comes back to you. That's pretty much how I've built my whole brand. I know it doesn't sound too complicated, but just working with other people, lots of partnerships, and give love, get love.
Get love, give love. I don't even know how to say what you just said.
As great as an answer as that is, I think what I'm trying to pull out of the three of us and people who want to send in some tweets is, what are the actual actions? What are you doing to acquire and to maybe it's because I phrased the question as how to best earn this exposure, when really earning it, and I saw a lot of in the tweets, I'm sure everyone saw them, lots of be remarkable, stand out, all of that, and I agree that does help you to earn the exposure, but in the end, how do you actually get the interview? How do you actually show up in those newspapers? How do you actually show up in traditional media and not just social media? How did those things happen for you, Natalie? And then I'm really curious to hear Chris's response.
Yeah, you have to ask. It just starts with asking. So many people are afraid to just send somebody an email or reach out to someone who they think are on a level that's way up here and they're way down here. And everyone starts way down here, but that's okay. There's a lot of people who are willing to help you out along the way. And I just think that it's really important to ask. Even when I wrote to you guys and to the Human Business Works team, and I didn't know if I was going to get a response. I was hoping I would, because you guys are super cool and awesome, and I wanted to do your show, but you just have to ask. And actually, I didn't think that you guys would respond. That was my gut feeling was like, I don't know if they'll respond, but I'm going to give it a shot anyways. And it's been like that for a lot of the media outlets that I've pitched and have ended up going on to be featured in.
Well, but I mean, now we've dwarfed that by having you on this show, Natalie. So, I mean, Disneyland and all. It's funny how many people responded, be awesome. And I just sort of have this feeling back of, that's really hard to quantify. I mean, Clay Hebert has, like a real measurement. But, I'm really stuck on dollarshaveclub.com. And their version of awesome was just that incredible video. And that video blew them right past everything else, because what they did was they said, here's how we differentiate. Here's what we are. We're kind of cheaper than them. We're going to be funny about it. And they couldn't even anticipate how well they did. They sold themselves out. They had no idea that it was going to go. And so that version of awesome, the way they got all that earned response was with humor. And interestingly enough, Christopher S. Penn at ChristopherSPenn.com had a certain content value test, which was like one of the briefest things he's ever written, that said, did I laugh, did I learn, or did I love? And I think that's a really good answer for how to be awesome and earn some value. Joe, I'm curious to know how you did it, though, because, I mean, you're not going to say this about yourself, but you're the expert of this. You got onto like all the Food Network shows. You got on College Game Day. I mean, you have really cornered the market on how to do this kind of stuff. I mean, how did you earn it? How did you earn your spot on that?
Thank you, first of all.
You're welcome.
But we've talked about this before, and Natalie touched on it as well. So many people are afraid to go out and ask those kinds of questions. For example, no other restaurant showed up on the ESPN game day set and basically pushed their way in with burgers to earn that kind of coverage there when it came to Madison, Wisconsin. No one else, when this guy who challenged us to the Travel Channel show, no one else hunted down and took some advice from a good friend, hunted down the producer of that show, contacted them through LinkedIn, and basically built an episode together. Mostly because people are just, and I think this comes out of, I'm trying to remember what book it is. I want to say it's Tim Ferriss, to be honest with you, where that homework assignment was given to reach out and contact 3 famous people. And in the first semester of the classroom that it was done, no one actually ever completed the task because everyone was just afraid, to turn around and ask the question. But I think the most important thing for me, as far as utilizing that exposure and continuing the relationship with the journalist, was I always made a point when I wrapped up a phone call or an email interview, especially someone who found some real interest in what we were doing, to say, look, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I'd very much like to be that Rolodex contact for you when it comes up about food and beverage establishments doing interesting things in new media. I'd like to be at the top of your list. Send me an email anytime, call my cell phone anytime, and I'll be here for a quote. And I started doing that probably 2 years ago, and now I have some really solid relationships with some really great journalists for industry magazines, for new media magazines. And that's, I think, what I'm trying to drive at here is people who are starting new businesses, how do they gain the actual exposure? How do they show up, not so much in their industry magazines, but how do they show up where the eyeballs are? And again, I think we've talked quite a bit about, fine, build a social media network, but then use that network to gain some traditional media coverage, because that's generally what's driving the sales portion of our business. But it also expanded our social network too, and the entire cycle began over and over again. So that's probably not exactly the answer you are hunting down, Chris, but it really, I'm in agreement with Natalie. So many people just aren't willing to ask the question because maybe they're afraid of getting the answer no. But if you ask 10 times, odds are one person's probably going to say yes and then make the most of that opportunity.
You hear no a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I stopped listening to you, Joe, because what I really got out of that was, people are basically lazy. That's what I got. What I heard was, but what I got was people are lazy. And what I was thinking was, people won't make the ask. And Natalie said it, and a lot of people are saying it. I mean, if you're not going to go out there and make the work to try to get the exposure, then you're not going to get the exposure. It's amazing how many people, here's the thing that I took, Joe. You said we basically co-created a program or a show or something like that. That's the extra piece. The extra piece isn't like, hey, I'd love to be on your show. It's like, here's the serving suggestion for how we can be on your show. That's where people get it wrong. But whatever, I'm just going to go off on that. Tyler, a lot of people tweeted some thoughts. What do you say?
Yeah, actually, to be totally honest with you guys, coming from that background, me personally working at a local station up in Maine, quick story, we would get tons of people almost on a daily basis sending us emails of saying, hey, do a focus on my product, do a focus on my business. We actually had one of the local car dealerships, he would call up and he would say, hey, if you want me to talk about what's going on in the automakers industry, I'm more than happy to do that. And that totally changed the perspective as opposed to just going there to talk about his business, but to actually talk about something that was going on that affected everybody was definitely the way to approach it. And we used him all the time to exactly what Joe, you had just said. We used him almost on a monthly basis to talk about what was taking place with Chevy and GM, really, to be honest with you. So it was huge. It really was. So yeah.
Hey, Joe. Joe, make a note in the Rolodex to ask Tyler every single time. Clearly, we're not utilizing the brains of Tyler Piper.
Before Tyler moves on to tweets, though, he makes a really great point. Because so many phone calls were coming into the station, and everyone was doing it the same way. And it reminded me of the one last thing. Whenever we attend a conference for one of the a conference is a bad example, an expo for one of the restaurants. Let's say that it's a chili cook-off. The rules that we use anytime we go to an event like that is you better get kicked out of this thing, or at least try, just so that you're going to get noticed, because it never fails. Every time we go in there with megaphones blazing and throwing cheeseburgers across an auditorium, people notice, and it always ends up with some sort of interview after the fact, or someone made some YouTube video. We go in with the mentality, all right, what can we do to get kicked out of this promotion? I know that sounds crazy, but because everyone else is doing the same thing, and it's one of the biggest challenges of doing business. Everyone's doing the same thing. How do you stand out, right? That's what everyone is saying in these tweets as well. So sorry for the rant, but that brought that to the front of my mind.
Oh, F it. Let's bring some people on because we're going to just keep kissing people.
Let's go. Let's bring up some of the tweets right now. So a lot of people jumping on board. Matt, he's saying, not focusing on exposure, but focusing on the quality of the goods and services that your business provides will in turn bring exposure. Guys, what about from that perspective about, it'll just end up bringing exposure? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it works. I think there's lots of people being awesome. I think that there's, awesome is sort of table stakes for the game. And, I've worked for enough bigger corporations that there's those stupid things that said, I just caught someone doing something right, and they have to fill in the employee's name. And that, if they get 20 of those, they'll get a free, tote bag or something like that. I mean, that's murder. That's like bullets in the mouth murder. I think that what needs to happen, there has to be this blend. Let's take Mark Horvath. Mark Horvath is at Hardly Normal on Twitter. His job is to make visible homeless people. And Mark's job is to say, whoa, homeless people are having a tough time. You want to talk about someone who has to balance being awesome but not touting himself or not really pushing? He has to say, look what I'm doing here. I'm showing off how great homeless, not how great homeless people are, but I'm showing off in this really great way what's going on in the homeless community. And to me, I think that, Mark walks that line very closely because he has to be humble. The minute he's not humble, there's haters on both sides that'll slap him down. And at the same time, he needs to get more attention to this. I think that's the thing. We should have this sort of tension about how we're looking for attention. And tension, one might say. There's your blog post. I think that, what the goal is to do awesome things and then do something to get the highlight or raise up the other awesome people in your community. So I'm curious to know anyone else's take before we go back to some more questions. But I guess that's the thing I'm looking at is Mark raises up the interesting people in the community.
Go ahead, Natalie, if you have something to add.
No, I think that's really important too. And on She Takes on the World, I think that's how we grew so quickly is that we were always just featuring people who weren't necessarily getting any exposure at all for their business. They weren't on national television or anything. They were just people doing really awesome things, and we reached out to them, and showcasing a lot of those people helped us to grow really quickly.
Cool. So, guys, I'm going to go ahead and jump onto a couple other tweets as well. Now, this actually goes to what you were saying before, Chris, about kind of giving back. This one from Melinda saying, do it better or different than the rest. Give back to the industry and community whenever possible. To go into that a little bit more about the giving back part of it all.
There's a lot of ways to look at that. One of the ways that we talked about it, I think it was in Trust Agents, we talked about the idea of, the fact that people like Bono and Jay-Z and all those guys are always bringing up the next layer of people, are always working on getting the next group of people to the game. And I think, he's a lot less famous, but, Skrillex, the dubstep guy, he's really pushing this new guy, Zed, who's a guy coming up on his same label. And I think that there's something to that. That's just what Natalie just said. She said, I'm pushing back, all these great women in the business community. Lynette Young, the women of Google+, she's doing that sort of thing. I think that's really where that all comes from is, if you're doing something to give back and sort of grow the community that's around you, you can't help but succeed at that. Anybody else? Joe? Natalie?
I hear it and think to myself, okay, how does this apply for someone in the retail part of business? How can they do it that way? Because the discussion that we were just having seems to be almost around, let's say in the DJ sense, almost around competitors where they're bringing up other talent, or when it comes to new media where someone else is bringing someone else up into the game. It's a little bit tough from a retail standpoint to do that from a because granted, competition's not a bad thing, but do you really want to bring attention, to your direct competitors? But I think the way to do it is just as you said, let's focus on the community. Let's let's do a weekly fundraiser where someone gets to be behind the bar making up a drink and, dollars, portion of the proceeds are donated to it. It's so much about not only bringing up others, but doing good for the community that your business does business in, I think is also what you're saying. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Natalie?
I work with a lot of people who have brick and mortar stores and encourage them to reach out to each other a lot more too. Just in my community, I noticed that a lot of people didn't really know the store owners a few doors down. And when you connect with everyone, there's so many things that you can do in terms of joint promotions. And again, I go back to the joint venture partnerships. When you're small, you've got to look at competition and your next door neighbors as people who could be amazing collaborators for you. And now I'm seeing a little bit more of that. And I think it's really working for a lot of people. So you just got to reach out. And I think it's really important no matter what kind of business you're in.
Tyler, what else are they saying?
We've got a couple different ones out there as well. It's funny to see everybody kind of come in from different wavelengths almost. But this one coming from Bernie, cousin Bernie, saying, be a subject matter expert. Listen more, do as you speak, be consistent, always try to do your best, show up, they'll find you. Guys, go into the subject matter expert part of that a little bit, if you will.
Well, Joe, you mentioned it. I mean, you said you made yourself available. You said, if you want to talk about quirky, interesting food things, I'm your guy. I've done the same sort of thing. I mean, oh my gosh, I am the go-to person for some weird crap. It's Jack's fault that I am a go-to person for Kim Kardashian information. Because
Really?
I got the cover story for Success Magazine for February 2012 because Jack talked to the woman who was writing the original story for 40 plus minutes. After that call, they called back and said, Chris, you should write the article. So suddenly I needed to know a lot more about, Kim and Chloe and I don't know the others. So, I mean, that is true. Kind of being a go-to person does matter. And, Peter Schenkman's Harrow, Help a Reporter Out, really definitely puts that point right home, I think, Help a Reporter. I'm curious, Natalie, are you using that service in any way or fashion, or have you even thought about Help a Reporter, or have you, KTCO friends?
I haven't yet, but I've been meaning to check it out and actually use it for a while.
Now's your time. Do it.
I'm going to do it.
Maybe the only thing I would add to the part about me offering myself to those journalists was it was a little bit of a gut feeling, and it was more it's probably less about me being an expert than it was about that you could feel that there was the opportunity for a relationship to be formed there, because they really felt like they were getting something out of the discussion with me that they hadn't considered when calling on me for the interview. And I could feel it from them too. It's sort of like, you're flirting with someone for the first time and there's a connection. It's your choice to take it on to the next level. That's how those interviews went for me. I mean, I did a remarkable amount of interviews around the exposure that we got at that restaurant for those first couple of years. And probably only a handful of them are ones that continue to this day. And that's because, we took our flirting to the next level.
Tyler, what else is out there?
Yeah, guys, we've got a couple more actually we're going to get to right before the end of the show. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the CX guy. Brian, he actually tweeted out, he says, I guess looking at the same principles of great brand experience would apply to gaining exposure. Just thinking aloud. So would it apply, guys? Chris?
I think so. To me, there's three layers to brand exposure. And one of them is the more you repeat, the more people understand that's what they're going to get. The very basics of the McDonald's brand are that you're going to show up and you're going to order something and it's going to come out looking roughly the same and it's going to take the same speed and all this sort of thing. Number two is that you're so good at it that you're known for it and people start talking about it. And that's kind of most people's pinnacle goal is to be talked about it. Number three is the real one, though. That is when you start using somebody's product or brand to start telling your story. So, for example, that the iPod is part of your story, or that the Harley Davidson is part of your story, or I'm the kind of person who is this sort of a thing. I'm a BMW person or whatever. That's the third layer of brand. And to me, the opportunity that Brian's pointing out is that, once you're sort of raising your awareness or once you're known for something, I mean, you can kind of earn your way into all three of those things. Joe?
I cannot possibly add anything more to that. Very well said, sir.